Declare war on the United States. Now, Fort Miles was designed and built for the sole purpose of defending the United States coastline and especially the Delaware Bay against the German Navy surface fleet. So we were preparing ourselves for battleships, destroyers, and cruisers. Okay. On December 19th, just a few days after the declaration, about a week after the declaration of war, 5 boats left occupied France and made their way across the Atlantic and to attack Allied shipping up and down the coast of the United States. Now, these 5 boats were not what we expected. They weren't battleships, destroyers, or cruisers. They were U-boats, or what the Germans call an Unterseeboot, or underwater torpedo boat. Under Operation Drumbeat, or Balkenschlag in German, these 5 boats were to take up positions along the east coast of the United States and start a coordinated attack starting on January 12th of 1942. Now, I would love to say that after they first came, we got rid of them, and that was the end of it. But the 2 weeks that these 5 boats were here, they sank 24 ships and damaged 2 others. While they were doing that, more U-boats were already on their way across. This went on, these sinkings went on for the entire war from 1942 to 1945. By the end of the war, 416 ships would go down off the east coast of the United States within 200 miles off of our coast, the closest one being off Atlantic City, New Jersey, which was only about 1,000 yards. Their main focus points were the New York Harbor, the Delaware Bay entrance, the Chesapeake Bay entrance, and even the Mississippi River in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, at the end of the war, now we're going to fast forward a little bit to the end of the war, okay? And keep in mind these U-boats were attacking, but the biggest part of it was the first 6 months of 1942. By the end of the war, by April of 1945, Germany was having severe problems. Most of their cities, a lot of their cities have been devastated by Allied bombers. Their navy was decimated, and their armies were being pushed back on about every front. In order to keep from avoiding unconditional surrender, Hitler and Karl Dönitz tried to come up with a plan to get the Allies back to the negotiating table, trying to arrange a truce. Trying to recapture some of that success in 1942, Karl Dönitz organized a group Seawolf, like Operation Seawolf, which consisted of 6 boats. These 6 boats would leave Germany. We'd already taken back France at this point, so they had to leave a little further away. They would make their way across the Atlantic and try to recapture that sinking of reattacking the coastline of the United States. Now, we got our act together a lot better since 1942, and we sank 4 of the boats in the middle of the Atlantic. However, 2 made it through. One of those was U-858. Under the command of 27-year-old Theo Bode, they would get off the coast of Newfoundland, and on May 6th, I believe, they would surface to get their radio traffic, and then they would learn that Adolf Hitler had committed suicide on April 30th. Germany was in the process of surrendering. Karl Dönitz, their commander, was now the Chancellor of Germany, and they were told to go ahead and surface, make radio contact, giving their course, position, and speed to the nearest Allied base and work out conditions of surrender. They made contact with U.S. Naval Station in Halifax, Nova Scotia. They were ordered to proceed on a southwesterly course down the coast of the U.S., and the United States Navy would meet them off the coast of the United States. Locate U-858, and they would escort her down about 50 miles off the coast of New Jersey, and they would do the official surrender out in the water about 50 miles off the coast. The majority of the crew would be taken off the boat and put on U.S. naval boats, smaller whale boats. A small contingent would be left on the boat to operate it under the watchful care of the United States Marine Corps, and they would be brought here to Fort Miles. If anybody's been to the fishing pier, that was the Army mine planting pier for the Army ships that took care of the minefield. So U-858 was brought there, and on May 14th, 1945, U-858 would make history as becoming the first enemy vessel to surrender in U.S. waters since the War of 1812. So as we reenact this surrender, this actually happened here 71 years ago. So let's watch these guys and find out how they did it and what went on back here in World War II. Now they've got them prepared to search. Corporal Henderson is going to, if you notice, he's approaching, he is not armed. He wants to make sure that he has no weapons of any sorts that can be taken away from him and used against them. As he passes them down, he's looking for any kind of information or merchandise that can be used as a weapon of sorts. If you notice also their uniforms, the majority of the crew of these U-boats were not using German-made uniforms. For the Battle of Dunkirk in 1940, British had left a lot of uniforms when they had to evacuate, and Germany, instead of making uniform for their crew since they were not on the battlefield, adapted a lot of these British uniforms for their own purpose by changing them and putting on the, with minor modifications of the insignias and that sort of thing. Now this would have been the third time that they've been searched. They would have been searched first time by the Navy out in the water. When they got to the fishing pier or the mine planting pier, when they got off the boats, they would have been searched again. And then when they were brought to the brig, they would have been searched for a third time. So these guys have surrendered and had to be searched for multiple times. So they're probably getting pretty good at it by now, right? Does anybody have an idea what the average... Breaking up a little bit. Does anybody have an idea what the average age of the crew members might be? Okay, I hear 19, 21. Pretty close, yeah, about 18 to 19 years old for the crew, late 20s, early 30s for the commanders of these boats. And they're all volunteers, so they were proud to be a part of these crews. When U-858 surrendered, they flew a black flag, and that's what they were told to do, not a white flag. Any idea why they would have flown a black flag instead of a white flag like we would normally see for surrender? Any ideas? No ideas? How many people have since watched the movie Pirates of the Caribbean? Do you remember the name Parlay? Okay, Parlay is a truce. Okay, so were they surrendering their boats? Yeah. They were surrendering their boats, but they weren't going down with their heads held low. Okay, these guys were an active warship. Okay, so they were surrendering their boats, but they were doing it with pride. They weren't just waving their hands and surrendering unconditionally. So that's why they would have been flying. Plus, a black flag on the water is a little easier to spot than a white flag.
Testing, testing.
Now, you notice our U-boat crews here, with the exception of one, are all pretty clean shaven and pretty well groomed. The normal U-boat commander or the U-boat crew probably wouldn't have looked so nice. They had very limited fresh water supply. So bathing and showering and shaving wasn't a priority. And these guys were out to sea a lot of times for many weeks, sometimes a couple of months. So each time the boat would have came back into port to get resupplied, they would also had to perfume and fumigate the boats because of the smell, keeping in mind that deodorant wasn't even invented until 1947. So can you imagine? Okay, so not only did they have body smell that you would have to smell, but also from the diesel engine, the fumes inside the boat. These guys were not going to be hugging and kissing with their wives when they got back home. Not until they got cleaned up anyway. Yeah. Now, if these guys would have arrived at Fort Miles, the Red Cross would have supplied them with Red Cross packages to get them started. This would have contained things like shaving cream, a razor, washcloth, chocolate bars, things just basic needs to get them started while they were in prison here. Now, when they arrived here, they were taken to the brig. Does anybody know where the brig would be at Fort Miles today, or Cape Local State Park? It's actually still there. Does anybody know? I'm seeing hands pointing. Yes, sir.
The Nature Center.
The Nature Center. So right where we're capturing or holding against their will all the turtles, the snakes and stuff, that's where these guys were held when they got here at Fort Miles. So it's still being used as a brig. Now, have you noticed these guys, when they're being searched and when they're walking away, they don't have their chins down. They are not sad or upset about who they are and what they did. They're very proud of where they came from and the success that they had of what they were doing. They're proud of their country. I'll make this clear. These guys were not Nazis. Okay, these were soldiers. These were sailors for the German country. Okay, these were not Nazis. And there was a lot of respect for the U.S. soldier for these guys because of it.
And for the U.S. Today there's heroes back there. Those are the only ones that attacked.
Just as another point, the commander of this boat, Theo POWs, just passed away 2 years ago. We actually had ceremonies here remembering his honor. So by him surrendering the boat, we'd like to think that he made a smart choice and he lived a right old life. Matter of fact, Dr. Gary Ray several others have had contact with Theo Boat over the years for information. And we have, if you've looked in the buildings and stuff over here, we have tons of pictures of U-858 and the whole surrender. So if you haven't seen that, please go check that out. That's all up-to-date stuff. Yes, right in the orientation building. Yep. Okay. Let's go ahead and answer if you want to have any questions.
Was they're the only ones in the entire German military that attacked our homeland. And once again, when they surrendered, they made the decision to surrender, and they had saved American lives too. That's why Mike Rogers just said that our boys respected them mightily for what they did, and they surrendered with their heads held high. Their two officers were sent over to Fort Hunt over in D.C. to be interrogated, and quite frankly put in a room that our FBI would book to listen to conversation. These boys were stayed here for 3 days, and then were taken up to Fort DuPont, where they pretty much served out the rest of the war. Some of them were sent to Mississippi to pick cotton. Others were sent to Texas. Because remember, during World War II, we had 16 million men under arms, and yet our crops still had to come in. So we used these boys, these German boys, there were 500,000 of them in the United States. We used them to bring in the crops in 1944, 45, 46. Many of them didn't even get home back to Germany until 47 and 48. So where our boys came home, got married, started having their families, went to school, many of these German boys are still in POW camps, either in the United States or, more importantly, we took many of them over to Scotland, and they were up there for several years. So today we're recreating this surrender. The actual trucks went out on the mission pier, met the German U-boat. The German boys were put in the trucks and they were driven right around the corner to the base brig, as Mike mentioned to you today, the Nature Center. And there they used their potato bags. Everything they had put into were potato bags. They threw them out on the ground and went in, had their first fresh meal inside the Nature Center. So we want to thank the Germans for surrendering again. Thanks a lot. Give them a hand. Okay, do you have any questions? Is there anything you... Okay, question.
Why did it take so long to let them go back home?
Good question. Why is it our guys immediately came home, were out of the military, started making families and going to school, and the German boys didn't? The answer is quite simple. The Germans developed the first intercontinental ballistic missile. They developed the first cruise missile, the V-1. Then they developed the V-2. We were very worried that they had developed technology to tow a V-2 missile silo across the Atlantic, stay off our coast about 60 miles, and launch V-1s and V-2s in on the United States. The Germans had played around with that technology, but they dropped it because they couldn't. It was just too hard to do. I mean, our first Polaris submarine didn't come out until the late 50s, early 60s. So, but we didn't believe them. We thought they were lying because the V-2s were raining in on Britain, they were raining in on Belgium. So the Germans said, no, we didn't do that. So we didn't trust them. So we gave them to the Brits, and they didn't believe it either. So by the time 48 came, they realized, heck, we'll just send them out. Good question. Other question? Question. No. U-858 never fired a torpedo in anger. She was on 2 what they call front boat missions, but she never fired a torpedo. She was, in that way, kind of a jinx submarine. However, she was the sister of U-853, which was the last U-boat destroyed in early May of 45. And when we finish this, if you haven't been in our museum, I suggest you go up the road here, go in our museum. We have a piece of U-853 up in our museum. We have a fully automatic Flak 38 twin barrel cannon. So U-858 never fired a torpedo in anger. Our Navy destroyed her in October of 47. She's gone, but we got a piece of her sister up in our museum. Good question. Yeah. Question is, when the Germans are captured overseas, what do we do with them? And the answer was, yes, we brought them over here. We made the conscious decision in 1943, when the Africa Corps surrendered, to bring the entire German surrenders over here because in 43 we didn't know whether they were going to be liberated or not in North Africa, and we didn't want Hitler having a chance to get his boys back. So one of the untold stories about World War II is that during World War II we had over 500,000 German POWs in every state in the United States before. Delaware was one of them. In little old Delaware, we had 6,500 German POWs up and down the state of Delaware working in the fields. We had 10 POW camps. Fort Miles was one. The main camp was Fort DuPont. It's a little known story, but it should be told, and it's a very interesting story. It's a good question. Other question.
How many Germans stayed here?
How many Germans stayed here? By law, you couldn't stay here. By law, American family had to sponsor you to stay here. So the idea was, unless you could find an American sponsor, we shipped you back. Question.
Why did they ship so many to Scotland?
Why did they ship so many to Scotland? Because our British allies wanted to interrogate, particularly the German U-boat guys. The German Wehrmacht guys, who captured the Africa Corps, we let them go. But the U-boat guys ended up in Scotland. And I can tell you right now, having interviewed several of them, it was a bitter pill for them to swallow. The war was over, and they had to stay in Scotland.
Okay.
We go through this every year. Other questions? All right, let me tell you in 1 minute what's going to go on here, so you'll be reading about it in the newspaper. You see our artillery park up here. This is a construction area right now. Starting next week, Kent Construction will be back. We're spending over $1 million. We're going to move all of our guns that you see out here to particular pads up on the side of the hill. What you're going to be reading about in the paper is this big gun back here. We brought it in back in 2012. This is barrel number 371 from the middle of turret 1 of the battleship Missouri. This is the actual barrel the Japanese had to walk past on September 2nd, 1945 to surrender to General MacArthur, and we got her right here in little old Delaware. So there's going to be a 500-ton crane that is going to be brought in here the first week in May, which is right upon us. It's going to be built. They have to put it together. A 12-axle trailer, disarticulated trailer will be built. The crane will be positioned right behind this barrel. The barrel weighs 120 tons. The crane will then lift the barrel onto the trailer. The trailer will come right down this road. The barrel will then be put in this slide. You can see the hole right in it right now. Weighs 50 tons. The barrel will be put through that, and then the crane will take the girder that's behind it, set it up on the pad up on the hill by the Great Dune by our museum. We're going to turn the girder around so the barrel's facing towards Governor Christie, so we can... I kid you not. We're GPSing. We're going to find his summer home. And all that's going to happen by the end of May. So you're right in the middle of it right now.
Test.
Other questions?